So today, I'm very delighted to have Andrew Campanella. Now, Andrew, you're no relation to Roy Campanella, are you?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. Do you know Roy Campanella, famous
I
catcher?
do know of him, yeah.
Okay. So today we have Andrew Campanella from National School Choice Week, and we're excited to talk about school choice in Virginia. School choice. Well, let's say that the fertile ground for school choice has been in the news recently in Virginia. A lot of parent frustration, a lot of dissatisfaction with the lack of options. And one of the things that I was inviting Andrew to come and talk to us about was what really is school choice? What's some of the history of it? And specifically, what are some of the myths about it that I think, in my experience at UVA and through the education system, these are very prevalent and very hard to dispel in the popular narrative. So Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself first off, tell how you got to National School Choice Week, and then maybe talk about what's going on with school choice nowadays?
Sure. Well, first, thanks so much for having me. I have been working in education for 15, 16 years. Before working in school choice, I worked specifically on the area of public school teacher certification. Before that, I wasn't involved in education, and I was involved in other types of industries and businesses. And I got involved in education because I wanted to find a career that I felt could make a difference for people. I know that sounds trite and corny, but that's sort of the goal that I had. I had always wanted to go into some sort of public service. And so I found education. I learned more about the challenges that a lot of students and families and teachers were going through. And I discovered that I loved this. And through my work in teacher certification and working with prospective teachers, I found that there was so much confusion related to K-12 education on the part of educators, people who wanted to become teachers. And later, as I dug even deeper, I found that parents were just as, if not more, confused about what's going on in education than folks who wanted to teach. And what I realized was that for something that impacts everybody's life, K-12 education, it's not always a very user-friendly field. It's not always so easy for families to understand all of the jargon and the buzzwords that are being thrown at them, all the policies and the regulations. What I also found was that for too many kids out there, their schools might be rated highly, they might get good grades, but they're not doing well. Those individual students are not doing well in school, or they're not happy in school, or their parents are not satisfied with the schools their kids are enrolled in. And for those kids, there needs to be other options. We can't let those kids just languish in schools that don't work for them. And so school choice is really the opportunity for parents and kids to work together to determine the right learning environment for an individual student. And to me, I'm agnostic when it comes to what type of options parents want to choose for their kids, whether it's a traditional public school, because we are huge supporters of public education, or a public school in a different district, or a public charter school, or a theme-based public magnet school, or a private or faith-based school, or a full-time online school, or homeschooling. Doesn't matter to us. But parents should, and in many cases do, have options to choose environments that best meet their kids' needs. So our goal at School Choice Week is to raise awareness among families about all the options that are out there so that families can navigate their choices and find learning environments that best meet their kids' needs, while at the same time raising public awareness and consciousness of the need for these choices and the benefits of actively choosing the right learning environment for your child. So I've been doing this with School Choice Week for the last 12 years and hope to be doing it for many years more.
So you said you shared a lot of a great perspective and view of the use cases, right? Like a very, maybe we've all probably heard about choice in the context of failing schools, right? But you're talking about context of schools that maybe aren't failing, but they may be failing from this one student's perspective or this one parent's perspective. Let me, as I am listening to you, I'm hearing the voices of critics. I'm hearing the voices of longtime teachers and people who are who are not predisposed to support school or educational choice. And there are a few responses that come immediately. There's a few questions, right, that come immediately to the top. Well, we shouldn't be giving people options to leave. We should be making the schools better for the students who are there, right? That's one that I hear over and over again. Another one is, let's start with that one, because that, I think, is the go-to that says the schools need our support. They need more money. They need this, they need that. They don't need parents and students leaving to go to private schools, homeschooling, etc. I would call that a myth, or submit that that's a myth, but obviously you've dealt with that. What's your response to that statement or criticism of school choice?
Sure. The first thing I would say to people is I understand where you're coming from. You don't want to be in a scenario where you send your child to a school, the school may be struggling, but you generally like the school and you want it to succeed, and you don't want to see that school suffer because so many other families would choose a different option. And you don't want to see maybe the school lose funding or the school lose support. And so you're concerned about what will happen with your child in that school if it is not supported. I understand that. But I think that we can do two things at once. We can fund public schools at the levels they need to be funded. We can support the improvement of schools that statistically are struggling, but we also must provide parents with choices. And I'm not just saying that for schools that are struggling, providing parents with choices to leave those schools. I'm talking about providing parents, even who have the best public schools in America in their neighborhoods, with choices to go to other public schools or other types of schools. Because if that school gets a good grade or a good rating, but it is not right for your child, you might as well be sending your child to what some people call a failing school, because the school is failing your family or is just not a good fit. And I say that not to criticize individual schools, but just because this is a fact of life. One size does not fit all. It's why there are a lot of different grocery stores in a community. You can go to a different store to find things that you want at. Maybe the next family next door would go to a different grocery store. It's why communities have different parks. One person might want to go to the park to hike. Another person might want to go to a skate park. Nobody is saying that you can only have one. We choose everything in life, every single thing. By the time you eat lunch every day, you've probably made a dozen or more choices. All school choice advocates, or at least all the folks that I know, are saying is, this isn't about criticizing schools. It's not about hurting anybody. It's about giving families options so that they can give their kids the best possible chance of success. And I don't think that you should ever say, we want school choice and we want to abandon one type of school. I think you should say, we want to improve all types of schools while supporting individual family decisions. I think that's the right way to go.
So the second criticism I know that comes up, and I had this conversation about 2 weeks ago with my sister, who, everybody in my family is an educator. I was an educator. My dad's a 49-year veteran of DC public schools. My sister taught, my mother-in-law taught, everybody taught. And I've heard this from the time I was in education school at University of Virginia, these criticisms. One of them is that, well, and let's think more in terms of the failing schools, right? The schools where, let's say they're either inner city or rural or something, where the schools are really just not great schools. And parents are really would be excited to get their kids out of their school because they don't have the capacity to change the school. The concern is, well, these parents, right? These parents aren't involved with their kids' education. They won't be able to make good decisions about their kids. I mean, that's a criticism. That's something my sister said that to me. She's like, how are they going to know? How are they going to discover their options? How are they going to know this? There's a kind of a paternalism there that says they can't be trusted to make good decisions about their kids' education. So they really should just stay where they are, right? That's the criticism. How do you respond to that from a choice perspective?
In a few different ways. The first thing I would say is the thing that makes the most difference when a parent chooses a school for a child is not a parent's level of mastery when it comes to academics or education jargon or statistics or the ability to go to a school and evaluate a curriculum. That doesn't matter nearly as much as the information a parent has about his or her own child. And what a parent knows about his or her son or daughter and what they need trumps everything else. And we see that not only in talking to parents, but in our research and in parent satisfaction surveys, that if parents can simply harness the knowledge that they already have about how their kids learn, where their kids are happy, what their kids are interested in, and where they are most likely to succeed, and apply that set of needs to looking at all the options available to them, they do and will make good choices. The challenge comes in where people expect parents to be able to go into a school and take a look at one curriculum and evaluate it next to another curriculum and see what scientific studies have been done about that. People aren't doing that. But that's not a predictor of whether or not your child's going to succeed in that school. So parents already have the knowledge and the expertise to make these choices. And when they do make choices, the studies and the research shows that regardless of what type of school parents choose, just the act of going through the process and choosing does have a determinative effect, and kids are more likely to succeed when parents actively chose. As far as parent involvement goes, we have seen more parent involvement in education in the last 24 months than I think we have ever seen in the history of our country. And that is because COVID-19 has forced every parent to be involved in their kids' education in ways that they never expected and in other ways that they never wanted to be. Schools today opening up or closing with less than 12 hours notice in some places. Parents are involved. They are engaged. I have never seen this level of involvement and engagement. So what I would say to you is that parents have the information to choose. They are involved and engaged more so than ever before. To what your sister has said about giving families resources to help them navigate choice, absolutely. We all need to do a better job of that. I think that one of the biggest challenges out there is that the process of choosing seems too complicated and overwhelming to too many families. And even though we see 40, 50, 60% of parents going through the search process, only 20% of parents are actually making choices. Some don't have choices. They discover that through the process. Others get stymied because they don't have enough time. And still others feel like they don't have enough information. We at School Choice Week, in addition to planning events and activities coming up later this January, we have the nation's largest portfolio of parent-friendly school search resources that are unbiased. We're not telling you to pick one type of school over another, available for families in each of the 50 states and DC, because we want to help demystify this process and give families as much practical, tactical, jargon-free information that they can use to help them find the learning environments that'll meet their kids' needs.
So I want to piggyback on that question because I thought that was very interesting, saying you're not an expert on the curriculum, you're not an expert on the pedagogy, but you're an expert on your kid, right?
And you can learn enough about the pedagogy and the curriculum by asking specific questions. So I'm not telling parents ignore it. Absolutely not. I'm just saying you don't have to look at the National Center for Education Statistics or any of these data libraries and find out how a specific piece of curriculum has ranked. You need to take a look at it yourself, ask questions about it. And if you don't understand something, ask a teacher or administrator how the principle that was just described to you plays out in the classroom. Mm-hmm. Ask questions. I'm just saying you can get that information. You can figure out if it works for you, but you have within you as a parent a lot of information that really matters.
So a couple of things. So indulge me. A couple of things pop up, but one is really a piggyback on that question, because there's the question of like, you have a motivated parent who wants to get engaged and to choose what's best for their kids. But that's not what I hear in the criticism. What I hear in the criticism is the parents that the people are worried about are parents that are not engaged, parents that maybe, that again, this kind of like paternalistic thing that says they don't really care about their kids. From these critics' perspective, these guys don't care. They don't have the time. They don't have the energy. Maybe they don't even have the inclination to make good decisions for their kids. So we, the experts, we, the educators, need to almost create an environment where they can't, I don't even know what it is. It's whether it's that they can't escape, or maybe the ones who are engaged will leave. The ones who aren't engaged will stay through just inertia. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the inertia goes the opposite direction. And I think that when people argue this and they say, if you give families choices, only the families that are super involved will exercise those choices. So as a result of that thinking, we shouldn't have choices because it might not be a level playing field. I reject that argument for a few reasons, but the real big reason I reject it is you have to ask yourself, if you're concerned about parent involvement and you think that not enough parents are involved, the way to address that is not to remove the biggest opportunity for involvement there is, which is the initial choice of how your child is educated. That is the most important decision and level of involvement that a parent could have in their child's education. So you can't say on one hand, yeah, we don't want to let them be involved like that, but boy, we want them to be really involved when it comes to raising money for a school, or we want them to be super involved when it comes to supporting budgets for a school district. You can't have it both ways. The best way to ensure greater involvement across the board is to ask for that involvement by treating parents as the experts on their own children, letting them choose where their kids are educated, and that will lay the groundwork for future involvement.
So I think that's absolutely, I mean, we fundamentally disenfranchise parents with regards to the initial decision, and then we're surprised that they leave it to the schools, right?
Right.
Can you address
exactly right? You say to them, you can't choose, and you can't get involved in this for XYZ number of reasons. And once we've told you to back off, then we yell at you for not coming forward. Mm-hmm. That is not right. And parents are getting a bum rap when it comes to involvement and engagement in many cases because they have been disenfranchised.
So a secondary element here that I think you alluded to but didn't specifically address is this question of what happens when you do open the doors a little bit. What happens when you do empower parents? And some parents look at the existing product and they say, you know what, that's not for me. I'm going to take my child elsewhere. I think that some of the criticisms are, well, you're going to be leaving the schools with fewer resources. You're going to be taking away the cream, right? You're skimming the cream off the top. But the question I actually have for you, Andrew, I mean, that's a big question, but it's really this notion that we think of these existing schools as incapable of adjusting or changing or responding to market pressure themselves.
Right. And so two things on that. First, when you introduce more choices into education, what happens is that students who are struggling, or students who are unhappy, or students who are not successful in a school, those are the students statistically, and based on all the research I've seen, as well as all my experiences talking with parents over the last 15 years, those are the students who leave. Those are the students who go to different environments. This whole concept that if you introduce choice, all the best the best academics in the school, all the kids who are getting straight A's and loving going there, they're suddenly going to leave. That makes no sense at all. That's like saying to people who all love driving a certain car that if they're given another option, they're going to immediately ditch the car they've loved and go to something else just because another vehicle was manufactured out there. That defies the laws of human nature and making choices. You don't choose something different if you're succeeding where you are. So that is number one. Number two, I would say giving families options and improve actually does help improve schools where families leave, because it provides a feedback loop. And if schools know that families have concerns and they see enrollment dipping and they find out why, they can work to improve the challenges that they're seeing in the aggregate from the families that are going. Maybe they're not addressing enough of the families that they serve's needs. Maybe that they're not offering programs that families in that area really are craving. How are they going to actually realize that they need to change if there is not that feedback loop that requires them to listen? And I'm not just saying this about public schools, because people always say, well, you want public schools to compete, but you don't want other types of schools to compete. No, I mean this for all types of schools: private schools, faith-based schools, online schools, charter schools, magnet schools. Every type of school out there benefits when they get real-time feedback that requires them to act.
Well, and that points back to this question of how do you put the options and the resources in the hands of parents? And I'm struck again, I'll go back to my conversation with my sister. She said, how are parents going to learn about these options? And I said to her, if you don't prevent the people providing options from sharing those options, just try to stop them from sharing them. Anybody out there, I work with a lot of educational entrepreneurs, people who do programs in coding and, martial arts and chess and music and language and all that stuff. They're constantly thinking, how can we make our opportunity available to parents? Now they're doing it, they're not even, and they're dealing with 3% of the population that is homeschooling, or 3% of the population that has discretionary money for education. So can you speak to that just in terms of how that works?
Yeah. So two things on this. How will parents find out about the options? Parents know about the options. I talk to families and they talk to each other. They read the news. They are on social media. They're on Nextdoor. They're on any number of apps communicating with other parents. People don't necessarily usually live in vacuums where they get no information. So families know the schools that are in their community. What families don't know in many cases is that those schools are accessible or available to them. And so that's where groups like National School Choice Week come in, where we do provide resources to families that are completely free to help them navigate the process. The challenge that we see in all this is not that parents don't know that there are options out there. I have not ever come across that. What I have come across is parents knowing that there are options out there, but not knowing when to get the process of looking for a new school started, wondering if their kids, for example, will have to take tests to get into charter schools, which they don't have to do anywhere, or if they have to pay tuition to send their kid to a charter school. Doesn't have to happen. You never have to pay tuition at a charter school. So basic confusion about things like that, which can be easily overcome with more information, public information and awareness campaigns, free resources online, and word of mouth between and among parents. It's one of the reasons we planned School Choice Week starting 12 years ago for every last week in January. It's because that's the time of year families need to start looking for schools for the next school year to have enough time to go through the process. And so we try to get that information out there. We want other people to spread the word. We have events and activities all across the country, 26,000 of them, virtual and in person, so that families can spread the word and learn about their options and get over those information hurdles that tend to get families stuck in where they can't make a choice.
Andrew, do you make a distinction between school choice and educational choice, in the sense of when you were deciding what school to send your child to, that feels like a comprehensive decision for most people. Now, in the homeschooling or hybrid model, it's a little bit more of a smorgasbord, right? Where people pick this co-op here, or you're doing Khan Academy, or doing these types of tutoring, or what have you. There are some programs that I have heard of, specifically, I think some in Arizona, which are like education vouchers, where you can use your special education dollars and say, you know what, I don't like the speech therapist at my school, or I don't like the counselor at my school. I'm going to take those dollars and use an outside therapist, which might, for somebody who loves their school but doesn't love this particular avenue, or something else. You really would prefer for your child to take their physics class at the community college or online or whatever. Mm-hmm. But those aren't like school-based. It's more, different. Do you draw a distinction between school and educational choice?
Well, in terms of the terminology, not necessarily. We use the term school choice because it's the most, people understand the term generally, in terms of choosing the full-time learning environment for your child, whether it's district, charter, magnet, private, online, or home, the full-time learning option for your child. Within those options, there are a lot of mix and match options that are really becoming popular now. And you brought up one of them, which is education savings accounts, where parents can essentially get a credit for a specific amount of money and divvy up the money how they see fit, whether it's online courses for fees, whether it's tutoring, whether it's books and resources, things like that, to put together a comprehensive learning plan for their child. You also have situations in different states, Louisiana comes to mind, course choice, where families can say, okay, for math and science, I really think that the full-time virtual school is the right fit. And for English and reading and history, we're going to send our child to the local public school. And maybe for sports, we're going to be a part of a club. That's more course choice, and we're seeing that come about a lot more. Then you have a whole nother aspect of educational choice or school choice, whatever you want to call it now. That's how parents get kids together to learn together. Learning pods, working together to all go through virtual learning together, or working on homework together. So we try to provide information to families about all of these things. Mm-hmm. And the new things like learning pods required a lot of research to come up with, because in some states, if you have a bunch of kids get together and one parent decides to teach them, you have technically created a school. So you need to be careful about how you pursue it, in case somebody tries to license you or ask you for your license. So we came up with a whole guide for families on that. We have a whole guide on course choice. We have a whole guide on how to access education savings accounts and private school choice. The bottom line is, I think it's all a good thing, because there are more options out there for families to develop the environments that work for their kids than ever before.
So Andrew, if we were, we're listening to this and we're like, yeah, this sounds great. Listen to this proliferation of options for parents, and people can customize and all this stuff. And we're happy, we're walking into the world and we're thinking, this is fantastic. But I'm going to posit I'm not going to posit anything. I'm going to say that it makes me think that there must be some resistance. There must be somewhere some resistance that's preventing this from happening. If what we're describing sounds great to the parents and pre-parents and post-parents that are listening to this or watching this, why isn't this a reality currently? Is it because of the criticisms that we talked about, or is there something else going on?
Well, yeah, in part, yes, because there are critics out there who are vocal and have a lot of money, who do not want parents to have options for whatever reason. I make it a point not to question the motivations of the people who oppose school choice, but just to say I disagree with them, because I think that they're on the wrong side of history here. The other aspect is, we have to recognize that even though we all, at least I want more families to have more choices, there are more parents actively choosing schools for their kids today, and there are more options available for families today in most places than there have ever been in the history of this country. So the growth in options, even in the last year, with 19 states expanding school choice options, has just been astounding. So even though the pace of change has not been as fast as it should be to reach every parent in the country, the pace of change is quickening.
So let's just turn our focus to Virginia.
Yes.
There's a couple of things that I either know or think I know, and I'm going to say them, and you can tell me if I do know them.
Okay.
One is that this is a think more than a know, that charter schools are not either as prevalent in Virginia as in other states, or at the very least in Northern Virginia, where I live, as other states. Can you talk about what the charter school situation is in Virginia versus other states where maybe it's proliferating?
Yes, absolutely. So Virginia parents who hear about charter schools always say to me, how come in Florida there is a charter school on every other block, and some of these are the best schools in the country, and in Virginia, there's only 8 in the whole state? And the answer is relatively simple. The law in Virginia makes it very difficult for a charter school to open. A local school district has to approve a charter school opening. In other states, there are other organizations such as charter school authorizers, universities, mayors, and even sometimes nonprofit organizations that can authorize the creation of a charter school. So if Virginia were to expand charter schools, the way to do that would be to change the way authorization works so that more schools have a chance of being authorized and opening. The reason Virginia doesn't have hardly any charter schools is because a school district doesn't say, we need another school in our district, let's open a charter school. They just open another traditional public school. I'm not criticizing the district necessarily for that. I'm just saying the law is not set up in a way that really encourages the opening of new schools. And as a result, that is limited options for families. So
can we take
hopefully that answers your question.
No, it absolutely does. I mean, yes, you're not, you're a restaurant is not going, if they're in charge of licensing new restaurants, you might suspect that they're not going to license a lot of new competitive restaurants in that situation.
Exactly. So you're not going to say to McDonald's, okay, you have a choice. You need another restaurant in the area because a lot of people want to go to McDonald's or want burgers. You're not going to say, all right, well, we'll let a Burger King open up. They'll say, no, we're going to put a McDonald's there. I mean, it just makes sense. That's why I say I don't criticize the districts for it necessarily, even though I wish more would. And in Florida, districts do authorize charters at a much higher rate. But I think that the law could be improved. Well, I know the law could be improved. You could have a state authorizing board. You could have local authorizing boards. You can have universities be able to make these decisions. That's what happens in other places across the country, even in California. And those schools have grown and become some of the best schools available for families in many cases.
So can you take a step back and I think people understand what a public school is, and I think people understand what a private school is.
Yeah,
but if a charter school is a public school in the sense that it receives public funding and it allows, we kind of have to say, what is public? When people talk about public education, what does that mean? If a charter school is a public school? Yes. And why is it different than a normal public school?
Yeah, great question. I love answering this one because people think that there are these massive differences between all these different types of schools. And that's why, they're controversial or whatever, but I don't think there should be any controversy. And the first thing I will say is you will never hear me say, or anybody at our organization, that we believe that any one type of school is better than any other type of school. We genuinely don't believe that. We don't take sides. We believe that it's up to individual families to decide. And we want families to have options, not because we think some schools are not doing a good job, but because we believe that families deserve those options so that more kids can have opportunities to go to schools that actually meet their needs, because all kids are different. So with that, You have schools that are public, meaning they're taxpayer funded, and they are operated by school districts. Those are traditional public schools. Then you have programs called open enrollment, which is defined by a lot of other terms in a lot of different states that allows families to send their child to a school, a public school, traditional public school, outside of their zone and sometimes even outside of their district without having to test in and without having to pay tuition. So that's called public school transfer or open enrollment. Then you have public charter schools. Public charter schools are also tuition free. They are taxpayer funded. They have to follow all of the same state laws regarding curriculum and what students need to learn in terms of standards as traditional public schools do. The difference is, and they cannot require kids to take tests to get into them. So you can't only accept kids into a charter school who have an A or B average. Everybody who applies has to get in as long as there's room. So what makes charter schools different? Charter schools have wider geographic boundaries that aren't contained to districts, so families from all across an area can choose them. And charter schools have more flexibility in determining how subjects are taught and whether specific themes are taught and whether specific curricula is used than traditional public schools. But charter schools can be closed if they don't meet specific academic benchmarks that are set by whoever created those schools, the authorizer who gave the school a stamp of approval. So what families need to know about charters is tuition free, no tests needed to get in, wider geographic boundary, but that school is going to be held to a specific set of benchmarks that if it doesn't meet, could be closed. In return for being able to be a little bit more or much more innovative in how they deliver education. Then you have public magnet schools. These are theme-based public schools. They're tuition-free. Sometimes they're restricted to students in one district. Sometimes they're available to students across districts. They focus on things like math, science, technology, performing arts, robotics, aviation, you name it. There are a ton of magnet schools out there, 5,000 across the country. Magnet schools can, in some places and in some states, require students to take tests to get in. It's the only type of school out there, aside from a private school, that could have an academic requirement. So magnet schools, similar in terms of rules. They have to follow the same laws regarding what standards are taught, but they also have more flexibility in what they teach and how they teach it. Then you have private schools. Private schools are not taxpayer funded. They are their own organization. They have to be licensed or certified by the state in some states. They do have to follow laws related to the operation of schools in almost every state. You have to meet certain criteria. In some states, the criteria includes what subjects need to be taught, how many days kids need to be in school, qualifications for teachers, you name it. It's different across each of the states. But private schools are not free. They charge tuition. One of the things that folks in school choice want to see, folks who support school choice want to see, is more tuition assistance for families who cannot afford that tuition, so that we can make private education more accessible to families. Okay, so private schools have lots of freedom and flexibility to teach what they want within the parameters of the state law. And they also have the ability to require students to take tests to get in, although many don't. Then you have online public schools, which are also public schools, free to attend, no testing requirements. They're conducted 100% online with certified or qualified teachers. They have programs that require or allow students to learn in ways other than staring at a screen for 24 hours a day. And they're very different from this emergency remote learning that parents are experiencing now during the pandemic. And finally, because I hope I'm not boring you, you have homeschooling, which is not the process of parents helping their kids through virtual learning. It's a technical term where parents have unenrolled their child from the school that he or she was in, and they have taken on the responsibility under state law of educating their child. Every state has its own homeschooling rules. In many states, you can't just say, tomorrow, all right, you're staying home and we're homeschooling from now on. You have to file a notice of intent with the state in some cases. You have to file updates with states in other cases. So check schoolchoiceweek.com to find out your homeschooling law. So there we have district schools, public school transfer, public charter schools, public magnet schools, private schools, online public schools, and homeschooling.
So a follow-up on the charter school is, I think people have this notion that the charter schools are able to, like you said, be more innovative, be more flexible, maybe, do their own thing within the confines of curriculum, graduation requirements. But is there also some notion that the regulations, the rules that might hamper either innovation or even dealing with, disciplinary issues with either teachers or students or what have you, that the charter schools are not hamstrung by those so much, and thus can take a more creative, personalized approach that's in keeping with what their mission theme is?
To an extent, that is correct. They do have more freedom and flexibility, and that freedom and flexibility extends to things like discipline policies. But there are areas that freedom and flexibility does not extend to, and that parents need to know about. Charter schools must, in every case, provide the same level of services for students with individualized education programs or special needs. Charter schools must always be tuition free. Charter schools must always allow any student to attend as long as there's room without setting any academic barriers. And charter schools must always follow state law regarding the standards that need to be taught in a school. So there is more flexibility, there is more freedom. Charter schools can be more innovative, but they do have to follow a lot of the same foundational rules that district schools have to do. The biggest innovation for charter schools comes with the fact that usually they are one school, or they are in a smaller network of schools, and they're not in a big school system that has a lot of policies that apply to all schools, regardless of if those policies would work for every school in the district. Districts have to do that, or feel they have to do that, because they got to keep tabs on everything. Charter school can be more nimble because it's one school and not maybe 40.
Right. Now, that's a really good point. So even if the school fundamentally looks the same or has a lot of the same rules, they can make individualized decisions. And typically, I would guess that charter schools are smaller so that they can, and like you were saying earlier, Andrew, the mere fact that the parent has made a choice and seen a choice and selected this option sets the student up for some measure of increased success. It's actually, that was something I wanted to ask you about, because one of the criticisms when you do show, obviously, in our society, when you expand choice, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to make choices that serve them, right? It's not going to be people eat, I eat too much, whereas if I was being mandated by the government to eat gruel, I'd probably be doing better. And there are obviously, in the same way that there's, malfeasance and abuse and negligence and bad teachers in the public school system, you would expect for that to be some case in the charter school or any other system. But one of the criticisms, I think, that when you set outcomes, right? Oh, the parents are more satisfied, the students are performing better under this situation. They say, well, those are the parents who stepped up and moved, which is self-selecting, right? It's like confirmation bias on some level. They are the ones who you would expect to do better.
Right. And that's why I have thought for years that we as school choice advocates should not pit schools against each other. And that the way to promote educational opportunity is not to say that one type of school is better for every child than all the rest. And it is not to use things like aggregate test scores as a way of painting schools as successes or failures, because those test scores are not predictive of how your child will do in a school. They might give you a good idea of how the majority of students who have previously attended that school have done, but it's not a guarantee. Also, schools that have struggled to educate the majority of kids in that school can turn around and they can improve. And we see that. And a lot of times that improvement is not reflected in their grades, their rankings, or their ratings. So In the past, school choice supporters have gotten themselves in a bit of a bind by saying XYZ types of schools are better than district schools, which leaves a gaping hole for people to go and say, well, based on this data, this school is not necessarily better than that school. I think we need to get away from pitting schools against each other and instead say, we need as many quality options for families as possible so that as many individual kids can succeed. And we need to, at the same time, make sure that we are keeping our commitment to all these type of learning options. That's the way I approach school choice from a family-centered perspective.
It's a really good point. And, it's interesting because how do you evaluate whether a school is serving the student, right? I mean, maybe it's test scores, maybe it's attendance, maybe it's surveys, maybe it's this or that.
But it's one way, certainly, or any number of different ways you can evaluate whether or not a school is successful. Here's another example. And I know I'm not like many other school choice supporters because I really don't like talking about test scores. But here's an example of a charter school that I knew about, and this is similar with other traditional public schools. Let's say a traditional public school opens a campus to help kids who were on the verge of dropping out, who had disciplinary issues and were on the verge of dropping out of their previous school. And this district creates a school that is a haven for those struggling students. And they go there and they're succeeding there. But in the first few years, kids who have had really difficult time with academics in their previous school are not getting good grades their first few years at this new school. But they are in school where otherwise they would have dropped out. If we just look at test scores, people would say that's a failing school.
Right.
But we can't just look at test scores because we have to look at the circumstances by which we're evaluating people. If you set up a school that's designed to help struggling students, you're not going to get A's across the board in your first year of operations because you have to understand that students are coming from challenging circumstances, and that's why they moved schools. So I'm really adamant about this because I think that if you just look at data and you don't look at context, no matter what type of school you're talking about, you're not getting the full story.
Well, and I want to amplify that a little bit because, like we're saying, there's so many different ways to evaluate. There's so many different starting points. There's so much different context. But what is the unifying principle is the parent deciding to send the kid to that school, right? Because I might send my kid to a school where he's not getting A's or he's not doing this. But if I, as the evaluator of my students, I'm the one who cares about that student, and I can, unlike data, I can take into account tangible, intangible, future, immediate, personal, everything in the same way that you and I both make those decisions when we go to the restaurant or go to, when we look on the internet to decide what to watch or read or what have you. So it seems to me as if people are still selecting that school must still be doing something right, unless you don't allow choice, in which case you can't determine or discern anything from the fact that parents are still sending their kids to that school because they have to.
Right. And here's an example. Here's another example that I think proves why we need to trust parents, because data cannot show you a situation like this. Let's say you have a daughter or son who was getting D's and F's in one school, and your child was completely unhappy there. And you move your child to a different environment, different school, and let's say the school that child left was one of the best schools in America, but your child was unhappy getting D's and F's. You move your child to a different school. Your child is getting maybe C's and B's. But that school isn't one of the best schools in America, and maybe it's rated a C. So are you a bad parent for having chose a school that statistically is not doing as well as the other school? Or are you the best parent in the world for choosing a school where your child is happier and getting better grades? I would say the latter. I would say that you have done right by your child, because just because that other school that you left was great for a lot of kids, didn't work for your child. You found an environment where your child is more likely to succeed. And when your child is more likely to succeed and is happy in school and is curious and is interested in learning, that builds the building blocks for lifelong learning. So, when people say parents might make bad choices, on what metric?
Well, it reminds me, I was thinking about food labeling and nutrition. And, if it says this has 0 calories, well, that might be exactly what parent A wants. And that might be the exact opposite of what parent B wants. And if it says, if you're looking at choosing a movie and it says, this has everything that a John Wick fan would love in a movie, that might be enough to make one person run screaming to the movie theater and enough to make it run screaming from. So really, you're right. I mean, fundamentally, we can talk about data, we can collect data, we can share data, but unless we agree on what's important, which we 100% do not agree on, we don't agree on what's important.
And I don't oppose collecting data.
Yes.
Obviously, I think data is essential. And I do think there is absolutely value in testing. But I think the value in testing and data is so that individual parents can see how their kids are doing and can work with teachers to create appropriate interventions if kids are not learning enough. I think that using data to label schools is a fool's errand. Using data to help parents craft better learning options for their kids is the way it should be deployed.
So to close, two things, one question or two questions. One is, I'd love for you to just tell again when School Choice Week is, what it is, but maybe before that, can you just address sort of, you said that in the past 24 months, we've had more change, more options, more growth, et cetera. What do you see as the path in 2022? Where is the path leading? So maybe question one, where is the path leading? Question two, how can people get connected with School Choice Week?
Well, I think we are going to see continued growth in options for families, and we're going to see even more parents exercising the options that are available to them. I think in our public discourse, we are very likely to see an increasing level of bipartisanship when it comes to school choice. I see it just this week. I like to think of school choice as a non-political issue. A lot of pundits and commentators like to think that it's more political than it needs to be. But I think we're really quickly coming to a national consensus that we need more options for families, because when you close a school 12 hours before it's supposed to begin and parents don't have childcare and have no say in decisions about how their kids are being educated, and this is happening all across the country in too many places, it's fundamentally unfair to the child, and it's really unfair to parents, especially when they're working. We're seeing this all across the country, parents saying this from across the political spectrum. So I really think we're going to see an increasing bipartisan tone for things like open enrollment in district schools, public charter schools, magnet schools, online public schools, even private school choice, and of course, homeschooling. And how can people get plugged into School Choice Week? Number one, it's a time to look into your options. If you're interested in making a change for the next school year, start in January. I know you think, gosh, the next school year is a million years away. But if you start in January to look at options, start going to some school fairs or school tours, you will have enough time to make a choice before the next school year without all the seats in the schools being filled up. Go to schoolchoiceweek.com, learn about your options, get involved in an event. And if you're happy with your child's school, and if you're grateful for how your child's teachers have handled these difficult times, use School Choice Week as an opportunity to celebrate your school and thank your child's teachers, because there's nothing more that we can do. We can't thank teachers enough in this country.
Andrew, this has been fantastic. I think a great mix of just overview, orientation, and some digging into the myths. So I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you so much, and Happy New Year.
Thanks.